And as we pull away, one of the things, and she's talking now about the violence, that's where we started with this hour as well. But one of the things that popped during that news conference that we want to get into is mail-in voting. And so since we started right where they're going, let's pull back now, and I'll bring in my power panel, Guy Benson and Wendy Osefo. We just heard a lot about mail-in voting from the White House just now. First, both of my guests, welcome. We're going to hear a little bit from the president and what he said on the issue. Watch.
You know, you could have a case where this election won't be decided on the evening of November 3rd.
Absolutely.
This election could be decided 2 months later.
It won't be 2 months, but what's wrong with the proper mailing count?
It could be decided many months later.
Have you discussed?
You know why? Because lots of things will happen during that period of time, especially when you have tight margins. Lots of things can happen.
Power panel now, Guy Benson, Fox News contributor, host of the Guy Benson radio show. Wendy Osefo, professor at Johns Hopkins University. Great to see you both. So, hey, Guy, spell it out for me. I mean, we heard from Kayleigh McEnany, we've heard from the president and surrogates and others with the campaign, the problems with mail-in voting. Kayleigh, again at the lectern, having to, specify the difference between mail-in voting, absentee voting, reminded that she, the president, and others have done mail-in voting. What do you make of it all?
Well, there are important differences between absentee voting and mail-in voting. So let's just set off to the side the president's tweet about possibly delaying the election, where he was flirting with that idea. He was roundly condemned, I think rightly so, for that. I think he has an absolutely fair point, however, on the question about states that are not accustomed to running primarily or almost exclusively mail-in voting systems scrambling to do so in the final months ahead of a national election. There are some states that have that system and have had that in place for quite some time, including a red state like Utah, but many other states don't have that capacity, and we're seeing some of those problems play out in very deep blue New York right now, where there are 2 undecided primary races from elections that were held a month and a half ago, with a judge just ruling yesterday that they need to start counting ballots that weren't postmarked, which I think is a serious problem. So I think there are some previews right now of what could go terribly wrong with mail-in voting, and to raise those concerns about the integrity of the vote, I think is absolutely fair game, if not actually an essential point to talk about.
So, Wendy, when you talk about capacity, because one of our cohorts, Greg Gutfeld, was on Outnumbered last hour with me, and he said it really isn't about corruption. He said it's about capacity. And if that's the case, we're not at the beginning of this pandemic, right? We're months into it. I'm prayerful that it's toward the end, but we don't know. But it's certainly been several months, and we knew that it was an election year. Why haven't states done a better job to prepare for what might just be people not wanting to go to polling places and wanting to do more absentee or whatever their options might be?
I think that that's a fair question. And I would say the same thing. There have been thousands of people who have died. Why hasn't the country done a good job when we knew the pandemic was, upon us? I think this whole notion of us being reactionary is really going to be a problem here in the United States. We know that there's an election coming. We have to prepare for this. But I think that there are 2 separate conversations here. And that's one conversation where people are looking ahead and saying, this is what may happen if we don't do this correctly. Then on the other hand, there's inflammatory language, which then starts to undermine the results of the election when it does happen. And that's where the president is walking a tightrope. It's okay to have a cautionary tale to say this is a lot at stake here. We have Americans who want to vote. We need to ensure that their vote counts and everything is done accurately. But then it's a whole nother conversation to start to say whatever the outcome is going to be incorrect. And that's what the issue is here. So yes, states need to be prepared. And yes, states need to start working on that, but we cannot start inflaming the rhetoric, because that undermines our republic.
All right, sit tight. Thank you both.